Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. A novel analysis presentation of Kimberly D. Baharias, Jean Rose D. Ocampo, and Gemma Regin Stone. Historical background of the novel. The novel was set in 17th century Puritan New England, specifically in Boston, Massachusetts. Puritan society is known for its strict religious beliefs, community-centric, and rigid social hierarchy. Puritan society sought religious freedom but established a strict, austere society based on their interpretation of Christianity. Puritans believed in predestination. Puritans believed that God's hand was present in every human and that he rewarded good and punished evil, causing widespread fear about salvation. They have highly structured social order with strict moral codes and norms. The novel was written in the mid-19th century, where Nathaniel Hawthorne critically examined the Puritan era. He explores the clash between personal desires and societal expectations, reflecting on the lasting effects of Puritanism on American culture. Background of the work. Hawthorne, a descendant of Puritan settlers, used the story to critique the rigid moral values of his ancestors, while delving into the complexities of human nature. Hawthorne's ancestors were involved in the persecution of Quakers and the witch trials, which likely influenced his exploration of guilt, sin, and the harsh judgment of the society in the novel. Hawthorne worked at the Salem Custom House, an experience that informed the novel's detailed description of bureaucracy and moral hypocrisy. Background of the author Nathaniel Hawthorne. Nathaniel Hawthorne was born on July 4, 1804 in Salem, Massachusetts, into a family with deep roots in New England. His ancestors played significant roles in the Salem witch trials, a legacy that haunted Hawthorne and influenced his writing, in themes of guilt and sin. After graduating from college, Hawthorne struggled to find his literary voice but eventually found success with his novel The Scarlet Letter in 1850. Before this, he worked at the Salem Custom House but was dismissed from his job, an event that greatly impacted his life and is reflected in the preface of The Scarlet Letter. Hawthorne's writing often delved into the darker aspects of human nature, exploring themes of guilt, sin, and conflicts between individual morality and societal expectations. He was a contemporary of transcendentalist thinkers like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, though he maintained some distance from their movement. Hawthorne's other notable works include The House of the Seven Gavels and the Blithedale Romance. His writing style characterized by rich symbolism, psychological depth, and exploration of moral dilemmas. It has secured his place as one of the foremost American writers of the 19th century. Nathaniel Hawthorne passed away on May 19, 1864, leaving behind a legacy of influential literature that continues to be studied and appreciated today. Character web of the novel Scarlet Letter. Dark blue circle represents the main character in the novel, Hester Prynne. Light blue circle represents other major character, Pearl, the daughter of Hester Prynne, Roger Chillingworth, the husband of Hester, Arthur Dimmesdale, lover of Hester, and the secret father of Pearl. Lastly, the gray circle represents the minor character of the novel, the townspeople, where burden and judgments came from. Characterization. Hester Prynne, a strong-willed woman who faced public shaming and wears the Scarlet Letter A as a mark of her adultery. Pearl, Hester's daughter, often depicted as a symbol of both Hester's sin and her salvation. Arthur Dimmesdale, the local minister who secretly fathered Pearl with Hester, struggling with his guilt and inner turmoil. Roger Chillingworth, Hester's strange husband who arrives in town and assumes a false identity to seek revenge on Dimmesdale. Governor Billingham, a Puritan leader in the community, rigid in his adherence to societal norms. Mistress Heavens, a widow known for her witch-like behavior, providing a glimpse into the darker side of Puritan society. Reverend John Wilson, another influential Puritan minister involved in Hester's public humiliation. The townspeople, representing the strict and judgmental Puritan society, they ostracized Hester for her perceived sin. Plot analysis of the Scarlet Letter with cuttable statement each chapter. Chapter 1, The Prison Door. Chapter 1 of the Scarlet Letter is entitled The Prison Door. The story opens in a Puritan settlement in 17th century Boston. The focus is on a prison door adorned with aged wood and iron spikes. The narrator introduces a crowd gathered outside, discussing a recent event, the arrival of Hester Prynne, a young woman holding an infant who is being publicly shamed for committing adultery. Hester wears an elaborately embroidered scarlet letter A on her chest, symbolizing her sin. She endures public humiliation, public scrutiny, and judgment while holding her secret tightly about the child's father. In Chapter 1, The Prison Door, one of the most significant quoted statement is, "Be it sin or no, I hate the man." This line is spoken by an elderly woman in the crowd, reflecting the community's harsh judgment and condemnation of Hester Prynne, emphasizing the rigid moral standards and unforgiving nature of the Puritan society. It sets the tone for the public reaction towards Hester's perceived sin and establishes the conflict between individual morality and societal norms. Chapter 2, The Marketplace. Chapter 2 of the Scarlet Letter is entitled The Marketplace. The scene shifts to the public marketplace, where Hester Prynne is brought out of prison to face the townspeople's scorn and judgment. She stands on a scaffold, holding her infant daughter, Pearl, and wearing the embroidered scarlet letter A. Despite the public humiliation, Hester remains composed and resilient, refusing to reveal the identity of the child's father. As she endures public shame, her stoic demeanor contrasts with the judgmental and morally rigid attitudes of the Puritan community. In Chapter 2, The Marketplace, a significant quoted statement is, "This woman has brought shame upon us all, and ought to die." This line is spoken by a member of the crowd, reflecting the harsh judgment and condemnation towards Hester Prynne for her perceived sin of adultery. It underscores the severity of Puritan society's views on moral transgressions and sets the tone for the public's attitude towards Hester throughout the novel. Chapter 3, The Recognition. Chapter 3 of the Scarlet Letter is entitled The Recognition. It introduces Rudyard Chillingworth, Hester Prynne's estranged husband. He arrives unexpectedly in the Puritan settlement and witnesses Hester's public shaming on the scaffold. Disguised under a different name, Chillingworth conceals his true identity from the townspeople. He quietly observes Hester's humiliation while harboring his own secret agenda, seeking revenge and trying to uncover the identity of the man responsible of Hester's adultery. Chillingworth's arrival adds an element of mystery and tension to the story as he begins his quest for vengeance and seeks to unravel the truth behind Hester's situation. In Chapter 3, The Recognition, a significant quoted statement is, "I will not speak, and my child must seek a heavenly Father. He shall never know an earthly one." This quote reveals both Hester's determination of her solid faith. On one hand, she is willing to accept that her child will never have a typical household or even know where she came from. Chapter 4, The Interview. Chapter 4 of the Scarlet Letter is entitled The Interview. Once Hester returned to prison cell, both she and the child were anxious that a doctor was called to tend to them and keep her causing harm to herself and anything else. The narrative delves into an encounter between Hester Prynne and Roger Chillingworth. Chillingworth, disguising his true identity under a new name, arrive. The meeting is tense and uncomfortable, with Hester recognizing Chillingworth's altered appearance but keeping his true identity a secret from the townspeople. They engage in a conversation where Chillingworth inquires about Hester's feelings and emotions regarding her public shame and the father of the child. This chapter reveals the complex dynamics between the two characters, hinting at Chillingworth's hidden motives and his growing obsession with uncovering the identity of Hester's secret lover. In Chapter 4, The Interview, a significant quoted statement is, "There are few things hidden from the man who devotes himself earnestly and unreservedly to the solution of a mystery." Roger Chillingworth speaking to Hester Prynne implies that a dedicated and committed individual can uncover nearly any mystery, whether it exists in the tangible world or within one's thoughts. Chapter 5, Hester and Her Needle. Chapter 5 of the Scarlet Letter is entitled Hester and Her Needle. The narrative focuses on Hester Prynne's skill with a needle and her workmanship. Despite her societal shunning, Hester's exceptional talent in embroidery and sewing allow her to create beautifully intricate garments. She sews garments for the townspeople. Yet, her proficiency in needlework contrasts sharply with the scarlet letter A she is forced to wear as a mark of her shame. The chapter portrays Hester's resilience and inner strength as she managed to support herself, her daughter, and other people who needs help. In Chapter 5, Hester and Her Needle, a significant quoted statement is, "Such helpfulness was found in her, so much power to do, and power to sympathize." Many people refuse to interpret the Scarlet Letter by its original signification. They said that it meant able. So strong was Hester Prynne with a woman's strength. This statement emphasizes how, despite the Scarlet Letter A symbolizing shame and adultery, some townspeople begin to interpret it differently due to Hester's resilience and capacity to help others. Chapter 6, Pearl. Chapter 6 of the Scarlet Letter is entitled Pearl. The story delves into the character of Hester Prynne's daughter, Pearl. The chapter focuses on Pearl's nature and her peculiarities as a child. She is described as an eternal and wild-spirited girl, often associated with otherworldly presence. Pearl's behavior is closely linked to Hester's Scarlet Letter, as she seems to be drawn to it and reacts strongly when Hester tries to hide or remove it. The chapter explores the enigmatic and almost supernatural qualities of Pearl, emphasizing her connection to her mother's sin and the role she plays in Hester's life. In Chapter 6, Pearl, a significant quoted statement is, "But she named the infant Pearl, as being of great price, purchased with all she had, her mother's only treasure." This statement highlights the significance of Hester Prynne's daughter's name, Pearl. It signifies how much value Hester attached to her child, considering her as her sole treasure, despite the circumstances surrounding Pearl's birth. This quote emphasizes the emotional and symbolic importance of Pearl, especially in Hester's life, and the deep connection between mother and daughter.
In continuation, I am Genios de Ocampo, and we're now down to the chapter 7 of this story. Chapter 7 is named for where it takes place, which is the governor's hall. 2 to 3 years had passed where Hester and Pearl visit to the governor's mansion to deliver the handiwork embroidered gloves for the governor. But other than delivering the embroidered gloves, the primary reason of Hester is to block the plan and order of principles by the government and religions to take Pearl away from Hester. As authority says, she is incapable of being a mother to Pearl due to her affair. As Pearl dressed in a fancy scarlet dress embroidered with gold thread, Pearl and Hester was teased by the children on the way, but Pearl chases them away. Together, Hester and Pearl is enters the governor's entrance hall, and Pearl is delighted to see the scarlet letter reflected in the armor that being displayed, and Hester, being engrossed by the enlarged reflection, she took away Pearl into the garden to divert her attention. And upon arriving in the garden, Pearl suddenly cries for a red rose, and as Hester calmed her down, men gradually approached to their direction. In this chapter, Pearl is viewed as a living embodiment, as Hester sins, a proof of the affair, and that made Hester dress Pearl a fancy clothes, as people don't see Pearl as her. As for the quotable quote of this chapter, at that epoch of pristine simplicity, however, matters of even slighter public interest and of far less intrinsic weight than the welfare of Hester and her child were strangely mixed up with the deliberations of legislators and acts of state. As this chapter emphasizes how people view Pearl as Hester's sin, and that there is a framework that designed to deprive Hester of having the care of Pearl. In chapter 8, entitled The Elf Child and the Minister, it started with Hester Prynne is trying to convince Governor Bellingham to not get Pearl from her care, and she teaches Pearl everything she knows. Governor Bellingham questions her for her capability of raising Pearl under her care due to the fact that she is wearing the letter A, which symbolizes adultery. She did everything she could to convince the governor that Pearl should be under her keeping, but it seems like everything she says is nothing for him. This time, she asked the help of Mr. Arthur Dimmesdale to speak for her. And surprisingly, it does help her convince the governor to keep her daughter Pearl under her care. But because of what Mr. Dimmesdale did, Roger Chillingworth became suspicious of him, and that led Roger Chillingworth to dig more into the life of Mr. Arthur Dimmesdale. So this chapter emphasized how Hester Prynne convinced the Governor Bellingham to get Pearl from her care. As to the previous chapter, it questions the capability of Hester for raising her child. As for the quotable quote of this chapter, "Speak thou for me. Thou wast my pastor, and had charge of my soul, and knowest me better than these men can. I will not lose the child. Speak for me, thou knowest, for thou hast sympathies which these men lack. Thou knowest what is in my heart, and what are mother's rights, and how much the stronger they are when that mother has but her child and the scarlet letter," Hester said. This quote emphasizes how Hester tried to ask for help of Mr. Dimmesdale to convince the governor to let Hester have the care of Pearl. Chapter 9, The Leech. Roger Chillingworth became the medical advisor of Mr. Arthur Dimmesdale, and the situation here is more in favor to Roger Chillingworth because he had another motive than just being a medical advisor of Mr. Arthur Dimmesdale. A young pastor and an old physician, Mr. Dimmesdale and Roger Chillingworth became friends with one another. Roger Chillingworth did everything he could just to get the trust of Mr. Dimmesdale by praising him in small talk like a leech. So in this chapter, Mr. Dimmesdale appears as thin and pale due to a strange illness, but people still praise him as a saint, and that's when Roger Chillingworth offers his medical assistance, and due to that, Puritan's people applaud hoping that the doctor can cure their beloved minister, and that along the way of Roger Chillingworth being the medical advisor of Mr. Dimmesdale, they became a close friend to the point that Mr. Dimmesdale didn't see the motive of Roger Chillingworth behind those help that he offers for him. And as for the quotable quote of this chapter, good men ever interpret themselves meanly, said by Roger Chillingworth. This quote emphasized that good men judge themselves too harshly, that good people always think that they are more than worse and sinful than the others. Chapter 10, entitled The Leech and His Patient. Old Roger Chillingworth is a calm kind of person, but he is so determined to find out who is the lover of his wife, Hester Prynne. Old Roger Chillingworth is now digging through the heart of Mr. Dimmesdale and started his revenge using where he is expert the most, and that is through medicine. The clergyman was in deep slumber, even when Roger Chillingworth laid his hand upon his bosom, but the clergyman was still in his deep slumber. It was not clearly stated that it was Roger Chillingworth's doing that Mr. Dimmesdale put in a deep slumber, but it seemed like it. Old Roger Chillingworth is now positive that Mr. Dimmesdale is indeed the lover of his wife, Hester Prynne. So in this chapter, Roger Chillingworth proves that all the suspiciousness that he felt towards Mr. Dimmesdale are all true. That it shows how Chillingworth get to know more about Mr. Dimmesdale by being with him as a physician. And as for the quotable quote of this chapter, this man, pure as they deem him, all spiritual as he seems, had inherited a strong animal nature from his mother or his father. Let us dig a little farther in the direction of this vein. This quotable quote simply show the eagerness of Roger Chillingworth to know the truth that behind of Mr. Dimmesdale being a spiritual man is still capable to commit a sin, that even if he is a noble man, he is still a human, a sinner. Chapter 11, The Interior Heart. After Roger Chillingworth confirmed that Mr. Dimmesdale is the lover of Hester Prynne, the relationship between them is still the same but was really of another character than it had previously been. Roger Chillingworth became thenceforth not a spectator only, but a chief actor in the poor minister's interior world. Even though the minister felt something influence of evil surrounding him, he couldn't put a word or reasons that would link to old Roger Chillingworth. While Mr. Dimmesdale suffering under bodily disease and known and tortured by some black trouble of the soul, still the Reverend Mr. Dimmesdale had achieved brilliant popularity in his sacred office. In this chapter, after Chillingworth proved that Mr. Dimmesdale is indeed the lover of Hester Prynne, he still continued being close with him, but behind those relationships that they have is another character that building upon him that is very different to the old Roger Chillingworth. As for the quotable quote of this chapter, the saint of earth, alas, if he discerns such sinfulness in his own white soul, what horrid spectacle would be behold in thine or mine, said by Roger Chillingworth. This quote emphasized how Roger Chillingworth viewed and described Mr. Dimmesdale's untold sin. Chapter 12, The Minister's Vigil. Chapter 12 started with the minister went to the platform where Hester Prynne spent her 7 years enduring the judgments of the people. The minister felt his limbs growing stiff with the unaccustomed chilliness of the night and doubted whether he could be able to descend the steps of the scaffold. Mr. Dimmesdale seems like trying to tell the public that he is the man they are looking for, not verbally admitted, but his action seems like it. So in this chapter, this was the time that Mr. Dimmesdale went to the scaffold to feel and imagine how Hester Prynne endured all the judgments of the people. As for the quotable quotes, "Come up hither, Hester, thou and little Pearl. Ye have both been here before, but I was not with you. Come up hither once again, and we will stand all three together," said by Mr. Arthur Dimmesdale. Chapter 13, Another View of Hester. In this chapter, Hester Prynne was shocked to find out about the clergyman's weak body. His nerves seemed absolutely destroyed. So at this time, clergyman's condition goes on and it seems to be weak, and Hester Prynne was too shocked to know about it. And even though Hester was treated differently by the people, she remained good and helpful to those who's in need. Hester feeds her daughter Pearl through her own handiwork, which she is an expert about, and that is embroidery. So in this chapter, we will see more about the view of Hester, how she handles everything, and how she endured all the criticism of the people. As for the quotable quote of this chapter, "Do you see that woman with the embroidered badge? It is our Hester, the town's Hester, who is kind to the poor, so helpful to the sick, so comforting to afflicted," said by these strangers. Chapter 14, Hester and the Physician. In this chapter, this takes place the confrontation of Hester Prynne and Roger Chillingworth about the secret of Hester's sin, about her affair. Hester confronts Roger about his vengeance towards Arthur Dimmesdale. So in this chapter talks about the confrontation of Hester and Roger Chillingworth about Hester's sin and the vengeance of Roger Chillingworth towards Arthur Dimmesdale. As for the quotable quote of this chapter, "By thy first step, Ori, thou didst plant the germ of evil. But since that moment it has all been a dark necessity. Ye that have wronged me are not sinful, save in a kind of typical illusion. Neither am I fiend-like, who have snatched a fiend's office from his hands," said by Roger Chillingworth. Chapter 15, Hester and Pearl. In this chapter, Hester reminisces about her past with Roger Chillingworth, of how this man changes far from his old self. We will also see how Pearl, being a mischievous child, continuously asks her mother about the meaning of the scarlet letter on her bosom, and to why the minister always keep his hand over his heart. So in this chapter, we will see how Pearl becomes curious about the scarlet letter on Hester's bosom, and also curious about the existence of the minister and why she always keep his hand over his bosom. Chapter 16, A Forest Walk. In this chapter, Hester and Pearl walk around the forest, and Pearl, being a curious child, asks again her mother about the scarlet letter on her bosom and about the black man who is roaming around the forest. So at this time, Pearl becomes more curious about the scarlet letter, that led her to continuously ask Hester about it. And as the story goes on, there the minister came. So this time, Hester and Pearl come to see the minister. Chapter 17, The Pastor and His Parishioner. This chapter takes place how the minister and Hester Prynne secretly met in the middle of the forest. Hester is trying to introduce Pearl to the minister and vice versa. Pearl also asks about the minister's relationship to her mother. Hester also admitted to the minister that Roger Chillingworth is her husband. And this is also the time that Hester confirmed that Roger Chillingworth is the one who makes the minister's body weak. And due to that, Hester asked for forgiveness from the minister, and the minister also forgave Hester. As for the quotable quote of this chapter, I am powerless to go, wretched the sinful as I am. I have no other thought than to drag on my earthly existence in the sphere where Providence had placed me. Lost as my own soul, I would still do what I may for other human souls. I dare not quit my post, though an unfaithful sentinel, whose sure reward is death and dishonor, when his dreary watch shall come to an end. Said by Arthur Dimmesdale. Chapter 18, A Flood of Sunshine. In this chapter, Hester wants to introduce the clergyman to her daughter Pearl and tell him that Pearl will also love him as she does to her mother. The clergyman admitted that he is not quite good when it comes to making kids like him. Hester assures him that Pearl is such a good girl, and he will love her once he gets to know her. Pearl used weeds to imitate the Scarlet Letter like her mother. Also, Pearl doesn't want to come to her mother because the Scarlet Letter in her mother's bosom was taken off from her breast. So in this chapter, this was the time that Hester did introduce the clergyman to her daughter Pearl, and that he assured the clergyman that Pearl will also love him as she does to her mother, because this time was Hester and the clergyman has a conversation, and the clergyman becomes a doubtful of how her daughter Pearl will recognize him. This was also the time that Hester tries to take off the Scarlet Letter on her bosom, and that Pearl, being mischievous child, didn't want to come to her mother because the Scarlet Letter was missing on her bosom. Because the Scarlet Letter on Hester's bosom becomes one of Pearl's gem or treasure, and it also became an identity of her mother for Pearl's view. As for the quotable quote of this chapter, adorn thyself with me, thou beautiful child, adorn thyself with me, said by Hester Prynne. Chapter 9, The Child and the Brookside. Chapter 9 takes place how the minister was worried because some of the physical features of Pearl are his resemblance. Also, Hester puts the transparency to the reader that indeed Pearl is the child of her and the minister. Hester is telling the minister what kind of child Pearl is. Hester declares to the minister that Pearl loves her and will love him once she gets to know him. Pearl doesn't want to come to her mother because she noticed something strange, and that is the Scarlet Letter that is not worn by Hester Prynne. Hester doesn't have a choice but to put the Scarlet Letter on her breast for Pearl to recognize her, because the Scarlet Letter seems like an additional identity for Hester in the eyes of Pearl, and without it, Pearl feels strange towards Hester. Hester declared that the minister loved her and Pearl. Pearl also asked her mother if the minister will go back with them holding hands into the town. As for the quotable quote of this chapter, not now, dear child, but in days to come, he will walk hand in hand with us, said by Hester Prynne. So this quote takes place on how Hester told Pearl that this is not the time yet that Mr. Dimmesdale will walk hand in hand with them into the town. Chapter 20, The Minister in the Mist. At this point, the minister inquired Hester the precise time of which the vessel might be expected to depart. The Reverend Mr. Dimmesdale told physician Roger Chillingworth that he doesn't need any of his medicine anymore. Roger Chillingworth then realized that he is no longer a trusted friend to Mr. Dimmesdale. Mr. Dimmesdale parted ways with Roger Chillingworth in a calm manner. So in this chapter, this is the time that Mr. Dimmesdale has to depart in the town, and that he also confronted Mr. Dimmesdale that he doesn't need any of his medicine anymore, and that Roger Chillingworth also realized that he is no longer a trusted friend to Mr. Dimmesdale. It is also because that Hester Prynne admitted to Mr. Dimmesdale that Roger Chillingworth is the one makes his body weak. As for the quotable quote of this chapter, heaven grant it be a better one, for in good sooth, I hardly think to tarry with my flock through the fleeting seasons of another year. But, touching your medicine, kind sir, in my present frame of body, I need it not, said by Reverend Arthur Dimmesdale. So this was the time that Reverend Arthur Dimmesdale already told Roger Chillingworth that he no longer needs the medicine that he offered.
Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, everybody. I am Mary Tennyson, and I will be the one to continue the chapters and the rest of the topics of this book. So for the chapter 21, we have the New England holiday. So in this chapter, we have the public holiday because it is an inauguration of the governor. And Pearl keeps on questioning her mother why the people seem strange. Even the blacksmith cleaned himself and put on his outfit for Sabbath. It is because it is an inauguration and Mr. Arthur Dimmesdale are invited to do the sermon of the inauguration of the governor. Chillingworth, on the other hand, was smiling in the corner of the marketplace, but a kind of smile that is meant for something else, something evil thought. For the quote of this chapter, we have, they wait to see the procession pass, for the governor and the magistrates are to go by, and the ministers and all the great people and good people with the new soldiers marching before them. This quote is stated by the narrator. And the next chapter, the chapter 22, we have the procession. The Reverend Mr. Dimmesdale is to deliver an election sermon. So in this chapter, it is actually the continuation of what happened to chapter 21. While the procession is ongoing, Pearl seemed to wonder why Reverend Mr. Dimmesdale seems strange. Because Pearl questioned this because during the time when they were together on the forest, Mr. Dimmesdale is actually quite a different man. He even kissed Pearl. But in this chapter, Pearl questioned why Mr. Dimmesdale is strange because Mr. Dimmesdale doesn't paying attention to Hester and Pearl. And while watching the procession, Hester thought to herself that the Reverend Mr. Dimmesdale has now a very high reputation and unreachable for her. We have Mistress Hivens spoke to Hester Prynne, stating that the Reverend Mr. Dimmesdale is way far different from the one she met in the forest. And for the quote of this chapter, yonder the divine man, that saint on earth, as the people uphold him to be, as I must needs say, he really looks, who, now, that saw him pass in the procession. But this minister, couldst thou surely tell, whether he was the same man that encountered thee on the forest path. This quote was directly stated by Hester Prynne. Now let's move on to chapter 23, the revelation of the Scarlet Letter. Reverend Arthur Dimmesdale finally revealed the secret and acknowledged his sin together with Hester and Pearl. So this actually happens while they were standing on the scaffold together. Hester Prynne, Pearl, and Mr. Arthur Dimmesdale together they stand in the scaffold, and from there he admitted that he is the father of Pearl and he is the one who also commits adultery with Hester. Reverend Arthur Dimmesdale announced to New Englander community the real meaning behind the Scarlet Letter that Hester Prynne wore for 7 years. After revealing the truth, Mr. Dimmesdale died on the scaffold. So in this scene, Mr. Dimmesdale is not actually healthy anymore when it comes to his physical body, and before he admitted to the public that he is the father of Pearl, Mr. Roger Chillingworth actually encouraged him not to tell the public And he also tells him that he can heal him. But Mr. Arthur Dimmesdale already made up his mind to acknowledge Pearl as his daughter in the public. And he actually smiled and said that I escaped my sin. Because of his death, he actually able to escape his sin. And for the quote, the law we broke, the sin here so awfully revealed, let this alone be in thy thoughts. I fear it may be, that when we forget our God, when we violated our reverence each for the other soul, it was theirs thenceforth vain to hope that we could meet hereafter in an everlasting and pure union. This is narrated by Arthur Dimmesdale. And for the last chapter, we have chapter 24, the conclusion. After Dimmesdale's death, Mr. Roger Chillingworth got a disease which took place within the year. Roger Chillingworth, with his last testament, Pearl, the daughter of Mr. Pine, would receive an amount of property. So after a year of the death of Mr. Dimmesdale, Mr. Roger Chillingworth died, and after his death, it was written in his testament that all the properties that is under his name will be inherited by Pearl, even the properties outside of the country. There, Hester becomes an advisor to help women who experience something like what Hester experienced too. Pearl also finds her home. In this chapter, Hester becomes a woman advisor, and some women really experience the same experience or related experience as Hester does. They went to Hester to ask for advices, and it did not indicate her what happened to Pearl, but in this chapter it actually assures to the reader that Pearl is doing well, but it did not mention which place Pearl went. So for the quote of this chapter, we have, on the felled stubble the letter A goes. It is the narrator. For the cultural implications, culture of the place, we have the Puritan society. The story is inspired by the Puritan period, which adultery is punished by public humiliation and shaming. However, when Hester wears the scarlet letter A, which stands for adultery, seems like some people don't see it that way. For other people, it stands as art because Hester creates magnificent clothing designs, and some interpret it as an angel. Even though Hester faced judgment and publicly humiliated, she didn't forget to show goodness towards people. She helped those people in need. She didn't let her situation turn into an evil person. Then next, we have the Puritanical Society. The setting of the novel in a Puritanical society of 17th century Boston highlights the cultural implications of rigid religious beliefs, strict moral codes, and the harsh judgment of perceived moral transgressions. The public shaming and punishment of Hester Prynne for adultery reflects the societal norms and severity of consequences for violating these norms. We also have public shaming and judgment. Prynne's punishment, standing on the scaffold with her infant and wearing the scarlet letter A as a mark of her sin, exemplifies the cultural implication of public shaming. The town's harsh judgment or ostracization and continuous stigmatization of Hester illustrate the societal repercussions of deviating from accepted moral standard. And we have gender roles and power dynamics. The novel subtly addresses the gender roles prevalent in Puritan society. It depicts the limited agency of women and the societal expectations imposed upon them. Hester's defiance in refusing to reveal the father of her child and her resilience despite societal scorn challenges the traditional gender norms, hinting at broader cultural discussions about women autonomy. We also have the sin, guilt, and redemption. The characters' moral struggles, especially Reverend Dimmesdale's internal conflict and Hester's endurance, delve into cultural discussions surrounding sin, guilt, and redemption. Dimmesdale's guilt over his hidden sin and Hester's resilience despite societal judgment reflects broader cultural explorations of human fallibility, remorse, and the pursuit of redemption. We also have individual conscience versus society's expectations. Dimmesdale's internal turmoil, torn between dictates of his conscience and societal expectations, highlights the tension between individual morality and societal conformity. His struggle to balance personal integrity with societal norms reflects broader cultural themes concerning the conflict between individual conscience and societal pressure. And the last but not the least, we have legacy and consequences. The Scarlet Letter's lasting impact on the lives of Hester, Dimmesdale, and Pearl, as a testament to the cultural implication of one's action and their enduring consequences. It underscores the enduring effects of societal judgment and moral transgressions on individuals and their legacies. Let's move on to symbols. We have the scarlet letter A, pearl, the forest, the scaffold, and sunlight and shadows. The scarlet letter A initially stands for adultery, the sin committed by Hester Prynne. However, it evolves to represent different themes, such as Abel, which refers to Hester's strength, Angel, her kindness, and Artist, her embroidery skills. The symbol serves as a constant reminder of Hester's societal judgment, but also transforms into a symbol of resilience, independence, and redemption. Next, we have Pearl. Pearl, Hester's daughter, symbolizes various concepts throughout the novel. Initially, she embodies the consequences of sin, representing both the burden and the blessing to Hester's transgressions. Later, she becomes a symbol of innocence, nature, and truth, embodying the link between Hester and Dimmesdale and prompting introspection and revelation in the story. We also have the forest. The forest serves as a contrasting space to the rigid Puritan society. It symbolizes freedom, wildness, and a place where societal norms and judgment do not hold power. Characters like Hester and Dimmesdale find moments of solace, honesty, and introspection in the forest, highlighting the contrast between societal expectations and personal truth. Next, we have the scaffold. The scaffold is a physical structure where public punishment and confession take place. It symbolizes public scrutiny, guilt, and the judgmental nature of society. Throughout the novel, characters stand upon it, facing their sins and societal condemnation. And last but definitely not the least, we have sunlight and shadow. Light and shadows represent the duality of truth and concealment. Sunlight often symbolizes truth, exposure, and clarity, while shadow represents hidden secrets, guilt, and eternal turmoil. This interplay reflects the character's inner conflicts and the contrast between what is seen and what is concealed. Now let's move on to the style of the writer. We have the point of view, third person omniscient. The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne is primarily narrated in the third person, providing an omniscient perspective that allows insight into the thoughts and feelings of the characters, especially Hester Prynne. And for the tone in the Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne often carries a sense of moral seriousness, introspection, and a slightly dark or somber atmosphere. Hawthorne's tone reflects a critical view of Puritan society while exploring themes of guilt, sin, and redemption. And last but not least, we have the use of language. Nathaniel Hawthorne's use of language in the Scarlet Letter is characterized by its ornate and descriptive nature. He employs archaic language at times, reflects the speech patterns of the Puritan era, and uses rich symbolism and metaphor to convey deeper meanings within the narrative. And now let's move on to the literary devices. And for the symbolism, the Scarlet Letter itself is a prominent symbol representing various themes such as sin, shame, and redemption. On the breast of her own gown, a fine red cloth surrounded within an elaborate embroidery and fantastic flourishes of gold thread appeared the letter A. For the figurative language, we have irony. Thus, the young and pure would be thought to look at her with the scarlet letter flaming on her breast, at her, the child of honorable parents, at her, the mother of a babe that would hereafter be a woman. We also have simile. Writing horror twisted itself across his features like a snake, gliding swiftly over them and making one little pause, with all its breath involutions in open sight. We have a simile. Continually indeed, as it stole onward, the streamlet kept up a babble kind, quite soothing but melancholy like the voice of a young child that was spending its infancy without playfulness and knew not how to be merry among sad acquaintances and events of somber hue. In years, though a vague report would now and then find its way across the sea like a shapeless piece of driftwood, tossed ashore with the initials of a name upon it, yet no tidings of them unquestionably authentic were received. And for the allusions, we have historical allusion, whither, as there is fair authority for believing, It had sprung up under the footsteps of the sainted Anne Hutchinson as she entered the prison door. We also have biblical allusion. Luther, according to the scandal of his monkish enemies, was a brat of that hellish breed. And religious allusion. Had there been a papist among the crowd of Puritans, he might have seen in this beautiful woman, so picturesque in her attire and mien, and with the infant at her bosom, an object to remind him of the image of divine maternity. For the religious allusions of a truth friend, that matter remaineth a riddle, and the Daniel who shall expound it is yet unwanting. Nay, we might have judged that such a child's mother must needs to be a scarlet woman and a worthy type of her Babylon. We have the historical and political allusion. Even political power, as in the case of increased matter, was within the grasp of a successful priest. And for the foreshadowing, but in the lapses of the tide, her footsteps had not been unheard on the sandy margin of the pool, neither had the apparition of her features been seen in the mirror of the pool. And for the themes, in the silence of judgment, whispers of truth echo loudest. Number 2, amidst society's shadow, the human spirit casts its own light. 3. Guilt burns conscience, but forgiveness nurtures the soul. Behind the veil of shame, courage finds its voice. In the crucible of secrets, redemption waits patiently to be forged. And for the conflict, man versus society and man versus man. For the implication of the title, the story focuses on its title and not on the character itself. The letter A that resonates with the story, the scarlet letter, symbolizes sin and adultery. It shows how people react towards certain people who are labeled as a sinner, and how the sinner responds to the judgments of the community.
As a woman reading Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, it is a thought-provoking journey through the complexities of social expectation and the resilience of the feminine spirit. His surprising plight resonates deeply, portraying the weight of judgment placed upon women and the strength required to withstand such condemnation. The scarlet letter A, initially a mark of shame, transforms into a symbol of empowerment, embodying history's inner fortitude and independence. The novel confronts the double standards imposed on women, illustrating the enduring societal stigma surrounding female autonomy and sexuality. It prompts introspection about the unwavering resilience of women, their ability to transcend adversity, and the power of personal integrity despite societal pressures. Through history's narrative, the novel serves as a testament to the enduring strength and resilience of women in the face of societal judgment and oppression.
Upon reading this novel, I have realized that not all people who are near to God and His religious are not capable of committing a sin, even though they are a noble man who were looked up by everyone doesn't mean that they were not tempted to do bad things. This story made me realize that doing good and right thing doesn't need to be a hard thing to do. It's only a matter of what kind of decision you would make and what path would you choose. It's only a matter of choice. And as I delve deeper into the story, I just wanted to acknowledge Hester Prynne's character for being a strong and independent woman with principle, as well as Roger Chillingworth for being a man who only wants to know and hear the truth from the very beginning but was deprived of. Hester, Arthur, and Chillingworth's story made me broaden my perspective and understanding. This novel taught me a lot of things and allowed me to explore a different kind of story.
And for my insights, as I read the novel, I realize even those people that is near to God is also a sinner. The priests, minister, pastors, I consider them as people who are near to God. We praise these people, we adore them, and we admire them because of our ideology that they are serving God. Their action is something to admire. But the reality in those people is also a sinner. Thus, their sin is invisible to the human eye, for they are trying to hide it as much as possible. They carefully cover those sins. They carefully cover the sin. Just like the character of Reverend Arthur Dimmesdale. He is a pastor. The people adore and listen to his sermon, admire him, and believe in him as if he is a perfect creature. But behind the curtains, he is a sinner, an adulterer.